All right, thanks, Piotr. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I'm really looking forward to trying to give you a sense of some of the broader activities across the GBIF community, across the GBIF network. There's no way that I have time to cover all of them. And that, in a way, is maybe also good. Given that I fall between two speakers with a great deal of scientific expertise and depth of knowledge that I can't compete with, I'm going to present this, I think, essentially as a variety show, and instead try to highlight the diversity of activities, the sheer range of activities and innovation and continuous improvement that are part of the GBIF network. And highlight some of the things that we're doing, as well as some of the things that would be able to be done, provided a little dedicated effort, if we can. So there we go. That was my next question. All right. So there are a number of different ways to look at GBIF. It's a bit like the elephant with the 6 blind men sitting around. Depending on which direction you come at it from, you can kind of feel that it's something different than maybe your neighbor does. Because we are a data infrastructure, we have a number of different ways that we can calculate the work that we do, whether it's in terms of the formal members, the participants, the member states, and then international organizations that are part of our formal network, the numbers of publishers, the amount of data that comes in, the amount of data that goes out. Lots of different ways to sort of come at this. In total, what this provides is a picture of a mature infrastructure that we're now really trying to refine and, as Piotr mentioned, go from data accumulation to data impact, to data use, and really try to make sure that this data is available anywhere where people need to know something about the natural world in connection with their activities. So it's not strictly limited to scientific pursuits. In this room, I'm not going to tell you that that's not the most important thing, but there are other things that can be done and that we're eager to see done. We also focus, because we focus on geographic distribution of species, or the information that we provide gives you a sense of that. We have a number of maps you can look at to try to understand what is GBIF. We can look at our formal membership, which, as you can see, skews very much to the new world in terms of our formal participants, but that is no obstacle to participating in GBIF. The map's gotten a little fuzzy. It looks like it's also bounced out, but you can see that in the absence of formal participation, say in Central Asia and the Far East, there are many institutions that are already sharing data into GBIF. So it does, in terms of the data and the data accumulation, tend to even out. And then you can look at just the data themselves, right? And here again, this tells a story, but it might not be a story of biodiversity. Anyone who sort of looks at global patterns of biodiversity can tell you that this is not a map of that. We could say that this is a map of money, right? This is a map where countries have the money, the resources to invest in digitization of data on biodiversity. However, we do what we can. It is best available data at this global scale in terms of the patterns of species distribution around the planet. And those reservations that we might have about it, the gaps and biases that we might worry about, they don't actually provide a huge obstacle to the use of this data in research. Here you can see a chart so we are at a point where the amount of peer-reviewed research that makes use of GBIF-mediated data every day is approaching 9 papers. This isn't passing references and sort of mentions in different things. These are close to 9 papers a day that make substantive use of the data in their findings. And so we are still going through our results from 2025 We're closing in. We expect that we'll probably wind up somewhere in the range of 27 or 2,800 papers that made use of the data this year. That's a long way. I started at GBIF in 2014, where we were at a single paper a day. So there's been a lot that has happened, and a lot of interest and understanding of the kinds of things that can be done with this data in the realm of research. There are also interesting things that can be done at policy level. That same corpus of literature that you saw on the last slide, we actually did a really interesting, we do a lot of work around tracking the provenance of data and maintaining the provenance of data so that we can accrue credit back to the institutions that are sharing it. This exercise, the IPBES Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, something close to that, is a literature-based, conducts these global assessments that are literature-based. So IPBES is never actually going to be a direct user of data from the GBIF network. However, we took one of their recent global assessments on invasive alien species and looked at the papers, the research that was cited in that report, and then tracked it back to understand which of those citations were from papers that were based in part on the results of the authors from GBIF-mediated data. So we have 3,800 references with unique DOIs. These are to the individual papers. 130 of those matched the papers from the GBIF literature corpus. Sorry, and I've lost something in the process here. Sorry. Of the, I think, 34 background messages in this report, 33 of them were based on research that was enabled in part by GBIF. So there is this sort of secondary impact that goes on when data is used in research, and that research is then used in policy. I'll talk about another sort of policy platform here, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which has indicators across a range of 23 targets. Our latest analysis suggests that 12 of these targets have indicators or are in other ways dependent on data from the GBIF network. That's almost half, right? So the data, even though data exists, the data that our network provides exists at some remove from policy instruments. There is a strong case to be made that this is actually really fundamentally important to those policy, to tracking progress toward those policy instruments. And I want to sort of step back then too for a second and talk about where this came from. How did we get here? So GBIF is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. The idea for it came from a working group under the Mega Science Forum of the OECD. And this group of scientists put together recommendations for establishing not the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. It's the rise of the internet in its first appearance. These were scientists and policymakers who understood that digital data opened new possibilities for actually tracking our understanding and understanding of change in the natural world. So they proposed this system, you can see here on the chart on the right, of these different components. Many of these didn't necessarily exist at the time, but they were just thinking about what's possible within this framework and what would it look like to put together a distributed system that helped scientists, researchers, and policymakers make sense of this and apply this to the kinds of questions they want to ask and answer. I don't want to, put this up and have you think that this is the last end. There are many other partners that we could identify, but as you sort of unpack each of these different units, many of these things do now exist. And I would like to think that the task group members might be heartened by the fact that the general trend of activities across these and other partners is to figure out how to integrate and interoperate the data. And many of the, I think probably particularly students in this room who are doing this sort of work, you're grappling with these same kinds of questions. And there are others too that, geospatial data could apply to remote sensing, which I'm not sure that was particularly a phrase or concept in 1997 outside of maybe this group of experts who was putting this together. So, this vision really has persisted, or this is a very long-range vision that we're now continuing to work toward. We can either be depressed by it, that it's 25 years on and we're still working on it, but I think we are actually advancing the state of the art around the scientific and policy framework for understanding these things. So just a step back then about GBIF, we exist as this distributed system that can bring you sources of biodiversity evidence, a whole range of things, including citizen science, DNA, sensor-based, mostly near-sensed things, traditional survey and monitoring, data, specimens, literature. And then we have these mechanisms for sharing data, bringing it together. These things are really depend on some elements to grease the wheels, if you will. We need to have licenses in place, and we need to have tools that bring these different data sources together and align them so that they can be viewed in aggregate. And then through that, we make the data available so that end users can transform it and apply it to different things, whether it's research or, again, these policy instruments and goals. So this really gives us the sort of broader scope of things where we're working today. Why do we do this? It's not a database exercise. It is focused on impact and trying to make sure that this is worth doing. We did do something novel a couple of years ago in trying to understand the economic valuation, the economic value of this network, its services, and its impact. We commissioned a unique group within Deloitte, this large consultancy, to do a study. They provided some initial global findings, and actually, in part because of feedback from our community, we were able to identify the need that there was that the report needed to address. How do we go from these global scale understanding and recommendations to something that can apply at a national level? And so this came out in 2023. I'm just going to give you a couple of highlights. You can find this report at the URL. I've tried to provide URLs through all of this presentation. One interesting thing in a report that's going to focus on trying to understand economic value, when we surveyed users of the data, almost half of them said that they couldn't do what they do without this data. Meaning it's, essentially is priceless to them. So that was sort of something, we understand that it's an essential tool, but to have this sort of response from the user base was quite eye-opening to us, and maybe puts also this effort to apply economic terms to the enterprise in some perspective, or helps to do that. We also heard from the users that they view their work, 9 out of 10 people, as something that contributed to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, another of these policy instruments, which sometimes I think we're less, the data from GBIF, from the network, is less well represented in indicators for SDGs. It does bubble up. We understand some affinities, let's say, but this was also a helpful point and something that we learned in the course of this report. Ooh. And then the bottom line of the report was that there is a substantial benefit. So for every unit of currency that's put into GBIF enterprises writ large, whether that's the global network and infrastructure or within the national nodes like KSIB, users of the data receive about 3 units of currency in benefits, and the overall benefit to society is up to 12 euros, zloty, whatever we're talking about. Okay, so I want to highlight, I'm actually going to highlight some of the, I won't go into this in great detail, but I did want to, I think it's useful to reinforce some of the things that Piotr was talking about, the achievements here in Poland. So I'll talk for a minute about what I can see in terms of the Polish contributions to the network and the things that have changed in the recent past. So Piotr noted the vast escalation in the amount of data. I think his number was actually, his baseline number was actually more accurate than mine. It's probably closer to a multiple of 10, a factor of 10 increase in the amount of data since 2020 from the slide he showed earlier. That's impressive. That doesn't really happen in every country, and it doesn't happen without something having changed. What are the kinds of things that change? Well, resources help, right? And this is maybe an important place to mention, the role of people in this network is essential. You can't build databases and put them on servers and then expect anything as an outcome. You have to have humans involved. And that, whether that is organizing the mobilization of data, making sure that it's accessible to them, providing tools, doing the research, AI is not going to solve this. We may have people who will tell us that, these are the sorts of things that will be made easier. Sure, there are things that are easier in the process, but humans play an essential role, and the resources for humans to do this work is really fundamentally important. So don't take that for granted as we talk about a very, sort of technical kind of enterprise. Just to give you a sense, this is not just about putting data in the database again. You can see, like, the increase in the availability of data, is that the cause of increased use in peer-reviewed research by Polish-based authors? Probably not, but maybe the higher profile of activities here, greater understanding that the data are available. This is also quite impressive, in terms of an overall trajectory. And it does track quite nicely with the increase in data. It's not only peer-reviewed research. I just want to highlight one policy level example from Poland. So the Ministry of Climate and Environment has just submitted its 7th national report to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. I think it is just sort of a draft report, maybe the final one or the final laid out version hasn't come. On page 3 of this report, the Climate Ministry has identified both KSIB and GBIF as ensuring the interoperability and the possibility of comparisons on a global scale, and that together we're able to provide an increasingly comprehensive information on the state of biodiversity in Poland. I want to really stop and note that this is quite an achievement. We have many national nodes who have had resources for longer, who have generated more data, and do not have this level of profile in these reports. So, the persistence that Piotr and colleagues here have shown over the years, when maybe it feels like, you're having the same conversations and not seeing any outcomes, I think these are the kinds of outcomes that we look for. In understanding, are we making progress? Are we having an impact? This is really important to have this data embedded within the 7th National Report to the CBD, and the kind of thing that we would aspire to in any country, regardless of its size. So this is really something to applaud. And then I'll just mention one of the things that I can't talk about in great detail is the work that we do around translation. The example here of KSIB hosting a couple of hackathons that brought together students from the Faculty of Humanities and the Faculty of Science to translate material for the GBIF website suggests that there's a recognition that biodiversity data has value to others outside of science. Just a sort of comment from one of the volunteer translators. Our volunteer translator network across GBIF leads us to support 12 languages on gbif.org, our main site now, and through reports and hosted portals that we also support, there are other languages represented as well. So this is a really important piece of what we do and something that has scaled up in the recent past. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up here with a few different things that are going on to try to make sure that you have an understanding. If there are things that interest you or that you didn't know about or that you want to talk about or learn more about, I'm happy to follow up with you here today or afterwards. But, you know, again, I'm not even covering all of the sort of important things. First, I'll mention, you know, GBIF has been, as Piotr said, fair from the beginning. I think maybe fair before fair was a thing, avant la lettre, right? So all of these things, making sure that data sets had persistent identifiers, that there's no access control to the data, that we're basing the aggregation of data on interoperability provided through some community-based standards like those developed through TADWIG, and then consistent licensing. These are all the things that make this click. And if we hadn't started this way, we would have been struggling to reverse engineer it. So we are lucky in that we made some good early choices to address different things. Another values-based framework are the CARE principles. This may be less less high profile in Poland, but I want to highlight it because this really does let us reflect other ways of knowing about the natural world. So we have an expert task group that is really helping us prepare the way to be able to present different claims of rights and interest in biodiversity knowledge, and then also potentially, you know, navigate if those claims conflict with others, an institution that hosts data and a community that feels some of the information that we're providing maybe is sacred to them. How do we do that? What are the mechanisms that we have? Do we have the governance systems in place to actually address those sorts of questions? These are the sorts of things, in addition to just highlighting these claims, that this task group is helping us prepare for. I am definitely not going to talk about Darwin Core Data Package. I'll leave that to our next speaker. But I just want to highlight that this is absolutely essential to an essential underpinning to the next things that I'll highlight. Right, so Piotr has mentioned the historic connection of GBIF to collections. A number of years ago, the Smithsonian Institution handed us a database called the Global Registry of Scientific Collections and said, can you please give this a home? We did more than that. We've actually improved it a great deal, developed a community around it that actually curates information about collections holding institutions around the world, and then brings together, on top of that, all of the specimen data that is available through the GBIF network. So this is, again, a mixture of technical improvements and community-driven improvements that you can't get one without the other. You can't get progress without both. Just to highlight, GR-SciCol, or as Italian colleagues like to call it, GR-SciCol, has 68 institutions that are alleged to be collection holders in Poland, and this presents it. And what this information providing this information in this way has helped these communities curate that and improve the knowledge and understanding of these collections. And some of that is driven around other technical and standardization systems, like this idea for a digital specimen, such as is presented by DISCO. We have an incredible amount of activity, years worth of research on taxonomic data with our partners, Catalog of Life. And as it happens, next week, a new gbif.org will be released, and it will provide, for the first time, the use of the Catalog of Life extended release as the primary taxonomic data source on gbif.org, replacing the GBIF backbone taxonomy. This may be something that these things may be things that you care deeply about if you're in this room. You may not know about them if you're in this room, but this is a long-term exercise, and it provides a great deal of flexibility in being able to understand taxonomic differences both globally and potentially at national scale. So there will be more about this from gbif.org next week, but I'd encourage you to have a look at that. We have a pilot program, also Piotr mentioned, for a tool called the meta barcoding data toolkit, mechanism for publishing existing meta barcode data sets and repurposing them for GBIF. Whoops. Oh, I guess the space went out there. Poland was maybe the second adopter of this, so has an installation in place and a good amount of data contributed in this aggregate here, comes from Polish researchers. And there's really interesting work going on around DNA. We have a project funded by the Novo Nordisk Foundation that is allowing us to sort of take on a number of activities that we've sort of outlined for over the past few years that will help us. I think maybe the big thing is providing a catalog of reference data sets that we can then that we can apply to this metabarcoding data and then continuously reinterpret it so that these data sources may actually improve over time. I'll show that in a second. I do want to highlight this project has a couple of efforts to help mobilize and publish data, or we're looking for assistance. So there's an open call for some subcontracts either to establish or improve data pipelines, data publishing pipelines for these reference libraries, as well as supporting reference databases, preparation and publishing so they can be shared into this work. If that's of interest to you, please look at that or on the GBIF homepage. So continuous reinterpretation of eDNA records. We think this is novel among the different data types that we serve in that some species that are only known from molecular evidence at this point, we might not have the background data to actually be able to place it somewhere in taxonomy or understand how it fits into the tree of life or the tangled web. With the capacity to integrate different reference data sets, reference libraries, and improve that integrated catalog over time, we believe that some of this data will actually be better identified over time. It will improve in terms of its taxonomic information. That is novel, and because of the amount of data that is coming in from eDNA, potentially a really important step, and that's one of the reasons that we've received this initial grant from Novo Nordisk Fund. All right, and then almost last, you've almost made it, is survey and monitoring data. Another piece that is really enabled by these other aspects, whether it's the Darwin Core Data Package, taxonomic interpretation. So a couple of years ago, TADWIG, which is the standards body, again, Biodiversity Information Standards, the acronym is TDWG, and everyone calls it TADWIG, if you don't know this. It provides a means of improving the data that we bring in from structured surveys or data collection that is conducted with a sense of consistent method. It can also capture absence data. There are nearly 5,000 data sets in GBIF already in this format, but you wouldn't, in some ways, you wouldn't have known it to date. It's been very difficult to access and difficult to compare, which is actually quite essential to this work. So there's ongoing work in this area, but it too is surfacing, a lot of guidance about preparing this kind of data set. The big change for this will happen later this summer when Cornell Lab of Ornithology's eBird data set is presented in this format in GBIF. Cornell is intent on essentially using GBIF servers to store its data, and they will use their own servers to run the visualization and different kinds of analyses that they do around, say, bird migration and other patterns. So when we introduce this, the GBIF infrastructure will go very much from an occurrence-based infrastructure to an event-based occurrence structure, a sample-based infrastructure, sorry. Because eBird itself brings about today brings about 1.7 billion records in. So a majority of the data in GBIF will likely be in this structured sampling event format. This is really important for different groups. Oh, well, maybe I'll let this sink in a moment. This is important for different groups. And one that I won't actually talk about much is the private sector, who I don't think we have present here, but it's an increasing both provider of data and user of data. And they speak a different language. They're coming from climate. They want to have simplified measures for companies to report against. But the thing that they do understand is that they want state of nature data, data that provides an understanding of change in biodiversity over time. This supports that. And they have recognized that and actually have asked that GBIF be a channel also for corporates who wish to share data as a public good. So we're doing a lot of work in this area as well. I'm now going to go into our capacity development work. Back to the humans. We've just started another round of projects funded by the European Union in our Biodiversity Information for Development program that generated huge amounts of data, new institutions sharing data into GBIF, and lots of different research, particularly from areas where there maybe hadn't been activity in its first round. And so we have another round of 100 or so projects around the world in sub-Saharan Africa, the Caribbean and Latin America, and the Pacific Islands. So we'll be able to try and fill some of those gaps on the map that you saw at the top. Okay, so I thank you very much for the chance to come and throw all of this at you today. If there are things, again, that have interested in you with this, please follow up with me. I will connect you with colleagues who are doing this work. Again, I'm not the expert, I'm a generalist, but I will definitely try to engage, connect you with those who can steer your interests for good. So thanks very much.